Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. The champagne bubbles rose like her hopes, beautiful, fragile, and about to burst into nothing but bitter air. Amara Blake sat in the golden glow of L'Étoile Brillante, the most exclusive restaurant in the city, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird, desperate for freedom. At 28, she had learned to read the signs of love, and every signal from Julian Voss over the past 2 years had pointed to this moment: the private dining room, the expensive champagne, the nervous energy radiating from his perfectly pressed suit. Tonight was the night he would propose. She smoothed her black dress, the one he had bought her for her birthday, the one he said made her look acceptable for his social circle. The fabric felt foreign against her skin now, a costume she wore to fit into his world of marble floors and crystal chandeliers. But love, she had convinced herself, required sacrifices. Julian returned from the restroom, his face flushed with something that wasn't champagne. Behind him trailed his usual pack of wealthy friends, Ethan, Sophia, and the others whose names mattered less than their bank accounts. Their laughter cut through the restaurant's elegant atmosphere like shattered glass. "Amara, darling," Julian said, his voice carrying a tone she had never heard before, cold, calculating, cruel. "I'm so glad you could join us tonight. There's something I need to share with everyone." Her pulse quickened. This was it. The moment she had dreamed of since their first date at the art gallery, when he had swept her off her feet with his knowledge of Renaissance painters and his promises of a future together. But instead of dropping to one knee, Julian remained standing, his friends forming a semicircle around their table like vultures circling prey. "You see," Julian continued, his voice growing louder, drawing stares from neighboring tables, "I wanted my closest friends to witness this moment of honesty. Amara, you sweet, naive girl, did you really believe I was going to propose tonight?" The words hit her like a physical blow. She blinked, certain she had misheard. "Julian, I don't understand." "Of course you don't." His laughter was sharp, designed to cut. "Look at her, everyone. Really. Look at her. Did you honestly think someone like me, someone with my background, my connections, my future, would actually marry someone so ordinary, so painfully, obviously ugly?" The world stopped spinning. The elegant restaurant faded into a blur of shocked faces and whispered gasps. Amara felt every eye in the room turn toward her, studying her dark skin, her natural hair beneath its straightened facade, her features that Julian had once claimed to love. The silence stretched like a living thing, feeding on her humiliation, growing stronger with each passing second. "I mean, really," he continued, playing to his audience now, feeding off their uncomfortable laughter and horrified fascination. "What was I thinking? Wasting 2 years on this little experiment? My mother was right from the beginning. There's a certain standard expected in our family, and frankly, Amara, you never even came close to meeting it." Sophia tittered behind her manicured hand, the sound like breaking glass. "Oh, Julian, you're terrible. But honestly, we all wondered what you were thinking." Ethan nodded sagely, as if he was participating in some important business decision rather than the systematic destruction of a human being's dignity. "Good thing you came to your senses before it was too late." Each word was a knife, expertly placed to cause maximum damage, designed by someone who knew exactly where she was most vulnerable. But something strange was happening inside Amara. Instead of crumbling, instead of dissolving into the tears they expected, she felt a cold fire beginning to burn in her chest. The humiliation was complete, total, witnessed by a room full of strangers who would carry this story into their own social circles. She could already imagine the whispered conversations at country club brunches, the knowing looks at charity galas, the way this moment would become legend among people who fed on the misfortunes of others. But beneath the shame, something else was stirring, something that felt like recognition, like clarity, like the sudden understanding of a truth that had been hidden from her for too long. She had endured 2 years of subtle corrections. The way he helped her choose clothes that would make her more presentable, the way he suggested she straighten her hair for important events because, "We want you to look your best." The way he always positioned himself so photographers would capture his good side while leaving her partially obscured, as if her presence next to him was something to be minimized rather than celebrated. The carefully worded suggestions about her weight, her posture, her laugh being a little too loud for sophisticated gatherings, the way he had gradually isolated her from friends who didn't meet his social standards, replacing them with acquaintances who shared his values about what mattered in life. Now it all made sense with the brutal clarity of a puzzle finally completed. She had never been his girlfriend. She had been his project, his charity case, his way of proving to himself how magnanimous and open-minded he could be while still maintaining his sense of superiority. The realization hit her with the force of revelation. She had spent 2 years trying to transform herself into someone worthy of his love, never understanding that he had never been capable of seeing her worth in the first place. "You're right, Julian," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. "You're absolutely right about one thing." The group leaned in, expecting capitulation, expecting the show of devastation they had come to watch. The room held its collective breath, anticipating the final moment of her complete humiliation, but Amara was discovering something about herself that she had never known existed beneath the carefully constructed facade of the woman who sought approval, who apologized for taking up space, who dimmed her light to make others comfortable. There was something unbreakable. She stood slowly, her full height commanding the room's attention in a way that surprised everyone present, including herself. She was beautiful, had always been beautiful, in ways his narrow mind could never comprehend. Her skin glowed like burnished gold under the restaurant's lights. Her eyes held depths of intelligence and strength that made his pale blue ones look shallow by comparison. "You're right that there's a certain standard expected," she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, carrying clearly through the hushed restaurant. "But the standard isn't about appearance, Julian. It's about character. It's about integrity. It's about the ability to see beauty in its truest form." She picked up her purse, a simple black bag that he had approved because it was appropriate rather than stylish, and her movements were deliberate and graceful in a way that commanded respect. "And by that standard, you're the one who doesn't measure up." Julian's face flushed red, then purple, as he realized that his moment of triumph was slipping away from him. He had expected tears, begging, the kind of public breakdown that would cement his narrative about her unworthiness. Instead, he was being lectured by the woman he had tried to destroy. And somehow, she was the one commanding the room's respect. "Don't try to turn this around," he snapped, his voice carrying the edge of panic. "Everyone in this room can see exactly what you are." Amara smiled, a real smile, perhaps the first genuine expression of joy she had worn in his presence in months. It was radiant, transformative, the kind of smile that lit up her entire face and made everyone who saw it understand what real beauty looked like. "You're right again. They can see exactly what I am." She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of diners who had stopped eating to watch the scene unfold, and she saw something she hadn't expected. Instead of judgment or pity, she saw admiration. These people weren't seeing her humiliation. They were witnessing her strength. "I am a woman who deserves better than settling for a man who mistakes cruelty for sophistication." The words rang through the restaurant like a bell, clear and true and undeniable. She reached into her purse and pulled out $300, money from her savings account, money she had been setting aside for their future together, money that represented hours of work at a job she had chosen to impress him rather than fulfill herself. "This should cover my portion of dinner," she said, placing the bills on the table with the kind of dignity that made the gesture seem regal rather than defensive. "I wouldn't want you to strain yourself financially by paying for someone so far beneath your exalted standards." Julian stood abruptly, knocking over his champagne glass in his agitation. The golden liquid spread across the white tablecloth like spilled sunshine, and somehow the accident made him look clumsy and desperate rather than sophisticated and in control. "You ungrateful, do you have any idea what I've done for you? The places I've taken you? The people I've introduced you to? The opportunities I've given someone like you?" The someone like you hung in the air like a slap, revealing the depth of his prejudice. The fundamental way he saw her as less than rather than different from. "Yes," Amara said simply, her voice carrying the weight of absolute truth. "You've shown me exactly who you are, and more importantly, you've shown me exactly who I'm not." She turned to leave, then paused, looking back at the group of people she had tried so hard to impress, spent so much energy attempting to win over, sacrificed so much of herself to gain acceptance from. "Oh, and Julian, When you're lying awake tonight in your empty penthouse, wondering why you feel so hollow inside, remember this moment. Remember that you had something real, something beautiful, something that could have changed your life for the better, and you threw it away because you were too small, too limited, too fundamentally broken to recognize its value. The restaurant had gone completely silent. Even the kitchen staff had stopped their clatter to listen. The moment had transcended personal drama and become something larger, a declaration of worth that resonated with everyone who had ever been made to feel less than they were. Julian's mouth opened and closed like a fish, gasping for air, his usual eloquence completely deserting him. For 2 years, he had controlled every conversation, every interaction, every moment of their relationship. He had been the one with power, with connections, with the ability to make or break her social standing. Now, for the first time, he was speechless, and she was magnificent. Amara walked toward the exit, her head high, her shoulders straight, moving with the kind of grace that comes from finally understanding your own worth. With each step, she felt lighter, as if she was shedding the weight of his expectations, his limitations, his desperate need to make himself feel superior by diminishing others. Behind her, she heard the eruption of whispered conversations, the scraping of chairs as diners turned to discuss what they had witnessed. But she didn't look back. That part of her life was over, finished, relegated to the past where it belonged. In the restaurant's golden reflection on the window, she caught sight of herself. Really saw herself for the first time in 2 years. Her natural beauty shone through, no longer filtered through Julian's warped perception of what she should be. Her strength was visible, her intelligence undeniable, her worth absolutely clear to anyone with eyes to see. The woman in the reflection wasn't broken. She wasn't ugly. She wasn't less than. She was magnificent. She was powerful. She was free. And she was about to become something even more extraordinary than Julian could ever imagine. The valet brought her modest sedan to the curb, and as she drove away from the restaurant, from that life, from those people, from the woman she had been trying to become to please someone incapable of appreciation, Amara Blake had no idea that she was carrying inside her body the seed of her ultimate revenge. Chapter 2. The Secret. 2 pink lines appeared like twin daggers, ready to slice through every assumption about what her life would become. Amara Blake stared at the pregnancy test in her bathroom, her hands trembling as the reality crashed over her in waves. 3 weeks had passed since the restaurant. 3 weeks since Julian Voss had shattered her world with his casual cruelty. And now this tiny plastic indicator was about to rewrite her entire story. The morning sickness had started subtly. A queasy feeling during her usual coffee routine, an aversion to foods she normally loved. She had attributed it to stress, to the emotional upheaval of rebuilding her life from scratch. But deep down, in the part of her mind that tracked cycles and counted days, she had known. The bathroom tiles felt cold against her bare feet as she sank onto the edge of the bathtub, still clutching the test. 2 lines. Positive, undeniable, Julian's baby. The irony was so sharp, it could have cut glass. The man who had called her ugly, who had thrown her away like yesterday's newspaper, had left her with the most beautiful gift imaginable. Even if he didn't know it existed, a knock at the bathroom door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Amara, honey, you've been in there for 20 minutes, came her mother's voice, warm and concerned. "Everything okay?" Clara Blake had moved in with her daughter immediately after hearing about the restaurant incident. At 52, she was a force of nature disguised as a soft-spoken elementary school teacher. Her presence had been the only thing keeping Amara anchored during the darkest nights of the past 3 weeks. "Mom," Amara called, her voice cracking slightly. "Can you and Nora come in here? I need to tell you both something." The door opened to reveal both Clara and Nora Blake, their faces etched with concern. Nora, 26 and fierce as a lioness when it came to protecting her older sister, took one look at Amara's expression and immediately sat beside her on the tub's edge. "What is it?" Nora asked, her voice gentle despite the worry in her dark eyes. Amara held up the test without a word. The silence stretched for exactly 3 heartbeats before Clara sank into the bathroom chair, her hand flying to her chest. "Oh, baby," she whispered. Nora's reaction was more volcanic. "That bastard," she hissed, jumping to her feet. "After what he did to you, after humiliating you like that, he doesn't know," Amara said quickly. "And he's never going to know." Both women stared at her. "Amara," Clara said carefully, Regardless of what happened between you two, he has a right. No. Amara's voice cut through the air with surprising strength. He lost any rights the moment he called me ugly in front of a room full of people. He lost any claim to this baby when he threw money at me like I was a prostitute he was finished with. She stood up, pacing the small bathroom like a caged panther. He made his choice. He chose to believe that I wasn't good enough for his precious bloodline. Well, now his bloodline will grow up knowing they're better off without him. Nora crossed her arms, studying her sister with newfound respect. So, what's the plan? The plan, Amara said, placing her hand protectively over her still flat stomach, is to show that son of a what real strength looks like. He wanted to destroy me. He wanted to break me down and make me feel worthless. She turned to face her mother and sister, and they saw something in her eyes they had never seen before. A crystalline determination that seemed to burn from within. I'm going to raise this baby to be everything he or she is meant to be. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to transform myself into the kind of woman who makes men like Julian Voss wake up in cold sweats, wondering how they were stupid enough to let me go. Clara stood slowly, crossing the small space to pull her daughter into a fierce embrace. We're going to help you, she said simply. Whatever you need, however long it takes. Mom, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Clara pulled back, cupping Amara's face in her weathered hands. Because that's what mothers do. We protect our children, and we protect our grandchildren. And we show them that love isn't about meeting someone else's standards, it's about exceeding your own. Nora joined the embrace, creating a circle of female strength that seemed to fill the small bathroom with electricity. Besides, Nora added with a wicked grin, I can't wait to see Julian's face when he realizes what he gave up. Over the following days, the Blake women threw themselves into planning with the efficiency of a military operation. Clara took early retirement from her teaching position, using her pension to help support the household. Nora, a talented graphic designer, began working extra hours to contribute financially, while also researching everything from prenatal nutrition to child development. But it was Amara who surprised them all with her transformation. The woman who had spent 2 years dimming her light to make Julian comfortable began to shine with an intensity that was almost blinding. She enrolled in online business courses, started a consulting practice from her laptop, and began the slow, methodical process of rebuilding not just her life, but her entire sense of self. The changes weren't just professional. Amara began working out with a ferocity that worried her family until they realized she wasn't trying to punish her body. She was trying to celebrate it. She was learning to inhabit her own skin with confidence, to move through the world as if she belonged in every room she entered. Her natural hair, which Julian had always encouraged her to straighten, began growing in glorious coils that caught the light like spun gold. Her skin, no longer covered in the heavy makeup he preferred, glowed with health and vitality. You're becoming yourself again, Clara observed one evening as they sat on the couch, Amara's hand resting on her growing belly. No, Amara corrected, her voice thoughtful. I'm becoming myself for the first time. I realize now that I spent so many years trying to be what other people wanted me to be that I never discovered who I actually am. As her pregnancy progressed, so did her business. Word spread about her consulting skills, her fresh perspective, her ability to solve problems that had stumped others. Clients began seeking her out specifically, drawn by her reputation for innovative thinking and unwavering integrity. The money started flowing, not just enough to survive, but enough to thrive. Enough to move into a better apartment, to buy quality maternity clothes, to start planning for her child's future. But more than financial success, Amara was discovering something that Julian had tried to steal from her: her own power. She began speaking at business conferences, her insight so sharp and original that she quickly gained a following. Her social media presence grew organically as people were drawn to her authenticity, her refusal to apologize for taking up space in the world. Late at night, when the baby's movements were strongest, Amara would sit by her window, overlooking the city, and make promises to the child growing inside her. You're going to know your worth from day one, she whispered. You're going to understand that beauty comes in every shade, every shape, every form, and you're going to learn that the only opinion that matters about your value is your own. The pregnancy wasn't easy. Morning sickness stretched well into the second trimester, and there were moments when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her ambition. But every time she felt herself wavering, she remembered Julian's laugh, his casual cruelty, his absolute certainty that she would never amount to anything significant, those memories didn't break her. They forged her into something harder, sharper, more beautiful than she had ever imagined possible. By her 7th month, Amara Blake had built a consulting empire that was generating more money than she had ever dreamed of. Her client list read like a who's who of successful businesses, all clamoring for her expertise, but the real transformation wasn't visible in her bank account or her growing reputation. It was visible in the way she carried herself, the way she met people's eyes, the way she spoke with quiet authority about subjects that mattered to her, the way she had learned to take up space without apologizing for it. Julian had tried to convince her that she was less than worthy of love. Instead, he had inadvertently given her the greatest gift possible, a reason to prove him spectacularly wrong. As she prepared for her final trimester, Amara looked in the mirror and saw not the broken woman who had left that restaurant 9 months ago, but a warrior preparing for the battle of her life. She had no idea that her greatest ally was about to walk into her world, drawn by a crisis that would reveal just how far she had truly come. Chapter 3. Birth of a Phoenix. In the crucible of her greatest pain, Amara Blake discovered that diamonds are only created under impossible pressure. The contractions started at 3:00 inches the morning, ripping through Amara's body, like lightning splitting the sky. She had prepared for this moment for months, reading every book, taking every class, steeling herself for the reality of bringing new life into the world without the support of the baby's father. But preparation, she realized as another wave of pain crested through her, was nothing compared to the raw primal force of actual labor. "Mom," she called from her bedroom, her voice tight with controlled panic. Clara Blake appeared in the doorway instantly, as if she had been waiting just outside all night. At 52, she moved with the quick efficiency of someone who had raised 2 daughters largely on her own after their father's death. "Time to go?" Clara asked, already reaching for the hospital bag they had packed weeks ago. Amara nodded, unable to speak as another contraction gripped her. In the months since discovering her pregnancy, she had transformed herself into a successful businesswoman, a confident speaker, a force to be reckoned with in professional circles. But right now, she was simply a woman about to become a mother, and the vulnerability of that reality was almost overwhelming. Nora arrived at the hospital within an hour, her hair still messy from sleep, her eyes wide with excitement and concern. "How's she doing?" she asked Clara in the hallway outside the labor room. Like a warrior, Clara replied with pride. She hasn't complained once, hasn't asked for him, hasn't wavered for a second about her decision to do this alone. Through the next 12 hours, the Blake women formed an unbreakable chain of support. Clara held Amara's hand through each contraction, her voice steady and encouraging. Nora paced the room like a protective sentinel, ready to fight anyone who dared suggest that Amara needed anything other than what she was receiving. When the nurses asked about the father, all 3 women gave the same response. "He's not in the picture." No explanation. No apology. No justification. At 4:17 inches the afternoon, after 19 hours of labor that tested every ounce of strength Amara had built over the past 9 months, Aurora Blake entered the world with a cry that seemed to shake the foundations of the hospital. The moment the doctor placed her on her chest, Amara understood a kind of love she had never imagined possible. This wasn't the conditional, performance-based affection she had experienced with Julian. This wasn't the careful, measured emotion of her previous relationships. This was pure, fierce, all-consuming love that rearranged the very atoms of her being. Aurora was beautiful, genuinely, objectively beautiful, in the way that made nurses stop their rounds to peek into the room. Her skin was the perfect blend of her mother's rich tone and Julian's lighter complexion, creating a golden glow that seemed to emit its own light. Her eyes, when they opened, were large and intelligent, framed by lashes that would be the envy of adults. But more than her physical beauty, there was something about Aurora that radiated peace, joy, contentment, as if she understood, even in her first moments of life, that she was deeply wanted and completely loved. "She's perfect," Clara whispered, tears streaming down her face as she held her granddaughter for the first time. "She's going to change the world," Nora added, her voice thick with emotion as she traced her tiny fingers. But it was Amara who spoke the words that would define the next phase of their journey. "She's going to know her worth," she said quietly, her voice still from labor. but filled with unshakable conviction. She's going to grow up understanding that she doesn't need anyone's permission to take up space in this world. The first few weeks of motherhood tested every assumption Amara had made about her own capabilities. The sleepless nights, the constant feedings, the overwhelming responsibility of keeping this tiny human alive and thriving. It was more challenging than building her business empire had been, but it was also more rewarding than anything she had ever accomplished. Clara moved into the nursery, taking the night shift so Amara could rest and maintain her consulting practice. The business had grown even during her maternity leave, as if her clients understood that a woman who could create life while building an empire was someone worth waiting for. Nora transformed into the world's most devoted aunt, arriving each day with new outfits for Aurora, new toys to stimulate her development, new ways to document every milestone. But the real transformation was happening in Amara herself. Motherhood had stripped away the last vestiges of the woman who had sought Julian's approval. In its place emerged someone who moved through the world with the quiet confidence of someone who had survived the ultimate test of strength. She began taking Aurora everywhere, to client meetings, to networking events, to speaking engagements. Instead of hiding her single motherhood or making excuses for it, she wore it like a badge of honor. "This is Aurora," she would say to curious colleagues and clients. "She's my business partner in training." The response was always the same. People were drawn to the obvious love between mother and child. Impressed by Amara's ability to juggle professional excellence with devoted parenting, her consulting practice exploded. Word spread about the brilliant single mother who could solve impossible business problems while raising a baby who seemed to charm everyone she met. Clients began specifically requesting her, knowing that her unique perspective, shaped by the experience of creating life and building success simultaneously, brought insights no one else could offer. But the changes weren't just professional. Physically, Amara had never looked better. The soft curves left by pregnancy suited her, giving her body a lush, womanly beauty that was impossible to ignore. Her skin glowed with the radiance that comes from purpose and fulfillment. Her smile, which had been tentative and apologetic during her years with Julian, now blazed with confidence. She began investing in herself in ways she never had before: quality clothes that flattered her post-pregnancy figure, a hairstylist who understood how to enhance her natural texture rather than fighting it, a photographer who captured professional headshots that showcased her intelligence and strength. The woman who emerged from those early months of motherhood was unrecognizable from the insecure girlfriend who had sought validation in an expensive restaurant. When Aurora was 4 months old, Amara made a decision that surprised even her supportive family. "I want to have her baptized," she announced one evening as they sat around the dinner table. "That's wonderful," Clara said. "Which church were you thinking?" Amara smiled, a mysterious expression that her mother and sister had learned to associate with her most ambitious plans. "St. Margaret's, the one where the Harrington family has attended for 3 generations." Nora nearly choked on her water. The Harrington family included several city council members, prominent business leaders, and most relevantly, some of Julian Voss's closest family friends. "Amara," Clara said carefully, "are you sure that's wise?" "If Julian finds out about Aurora, let him find out," Amara said with quiet steel in her voice. "Let him see what he gave up. Let him see what real beauty looks like." The baptism was scheduled for a Sunday in late spring, when the church would be filled with the city's most influential families. Amara spent weeks preparing, not out of vanity, but out of strategic planning. She had learned during her months of rebuilding that success was 20% skill and 80% presentation. And on this day, she intended to present herself as the woman she had always been capable of becoming. The dress she chose was cream silk, cut to showcase her post-pregnancy curves without being inappropriate for church. Her hair was styled in an elegant updo that highlighted the graceful line of her neck. Her makeup was subtle but flawless, enhancing her natural beauty without masking it. But it was Aurora who truly stole the show. At 4 months old, she was alert, happy, and impossibly beautiful in her tiny white baptismal gown. She smiled at everyone, reaching out with chubby fingers to touch faces and grasp at jewelry, completely unaware that she was the most beautiful child most people had ever seen. As Amara walked into St. Margaret's that Sunday morning, carrying her daughter and flanked by her proud mother and sister, she felt the ripple of recognition move through the congregation like a wave. These people remembered her. They remembered the restaurant incident, the gossip that had followed, The way Julian had publicly humiliated the woman he had dated for 2 years, but the woman they were looking at now bore no resemblance to that broken, diminished person. This woman radiated power, confidence, success, joy. And in her arms, she carried living proof that beauty real, lasting, meaningful beauty, had nothing to do with meeting someone else's narrow standards. During the ceremony, as the priest blessed Aurora with holy water, Amara caught sight of a tall figure in the back of the church, a man she didn't recognize, but who seemed to be watching the proceedings with unusual interest. Their eyes met for just a moment across the crowded church, and she felt something shift in her chest, a recognition that had nothing to do with familiarity and everything to do with destiny. But before she could think too much about the stranger's presence, Aurora was being returned to her arms, officially welcomed into the community of faith, blessed for the journey ahead. As they left the church, surrounded by well wishes and admiring comments about her beautiful daughter, Amara Blake felt the final pieces of her transformation clicking into place. She was no longer the woman who had been broken by Julian Voss's cruelty. She was no longer the insecure girlfriend who had sought approval from people who could never truly see her worth. She was Aurora's mother. She was a successful businesswoman. She was a force to be reckoned with. And somewhere in the city, she knew Julian would soon hear whispers about the stunning woman with the gorgeous baby who had appeared at St. Margaret's like a vision of everything he had thrown away. The phoenix had risen from the ashes, and she was more magnificent than anyone had ever imagined possible. Chapter 4. The Guardian Angel. Some miracles arrive wearing 3-piece suits and carrying checkbooks, but the real magic is in hearts brave enough to love without conditions. The fever had started in the middle of the night, turning Aurora's usually peaceful sleep into restless whimpering that sent ice-cold panic straight through Amara's veins. At 5 months old, her daughter had never been sick, and watching her tiny body burn with heat while her eyes grew glassy and unfocused was the most terrifying experience of her life. By dawn, her temperature had spiked to 104 degrees, and no amount of cool baths or infant fever reducer seemed to make a difference. Amara's hands shook as she bundled her into her car seat, her weak cries breaking her heart with every labored breath. "It's going to be okay, baby," she whispered, though her own voice cracked with fear. "Mama's going to take care of you." The emergency room at Children's Hospital was a chaos of worried parents, crying children, and medical staff moving with urgent efficiency. Amara clutched Aurora against her chest, feeling helpless in a way that her months of building confidence and success had never prepared her for. When they finally called her name, the triage nurse took one look at Aurora's flushed face and glassy eyes and immediately ushered them into an examination room. "How long has she been like this?" Dr. Lopez asked, her voice professional but kind as she began her examination. "Since about 2 this morning," Amara replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Her temperature keeps climbing no matter what I do." The next hour passed in a blur of blood tests, chest x-rays, and medical terminology that made Amara's head spin. Aurora cried weakly through each procedure, and with every passing minute, she felt more powerless than she had since the night Julian had walked out of her life. Finally, Dr. Lopez returned with results and a diagnosis that made Amara's knees go weak. "She has pneumonia," the doctor explained gently. "It's serious, but very treatable in children her age. However, we need to admit her immediately for IV antibiotics and close monitoring." "Of course," Amara said without hesitation. "Whatever she needs." "The thing is," Dr. Lopez continued, her expression becoming more cautious, "her case is severe enough that she'll need to be in our intensive care unit for at least 3 days, possibly longer." "The cost?" She handed Amara a sheet of paper with an estimated bill that made the world tilt sideways. Even with her business success, even with the emergency fund she'd been building, the amount was staggering. Her insurance would cover some of it, but the deductible and out-of-pocket expenses would drain every penny she had saved. "I'll figure it out," Amara said immediately, though her mind was already racing through the impossible math. "Just please help my baby." As they wheeled Aurora toward the intensive care unit, Amara felt the familiar sensation of the ground shifting beneath her feet. She had worked so hard to build security, to ensure that she and Aurora would never be vulnerable to anyone else's whims or charity. Now, faced with her child's life hanging in the balance, none of that mattered. She would sell everything she owned. She would take on debt that might take years to repay. She would do whatever it took. But first, She had to face the financial services office and try to figure out how to make the impossible possible. The billing coordinator was sympathetic but firm. Payment arrangements could be made, but a substantial deposit was required before treatment could continue. As Amara sat in the sterile office, frantically calling her bank to arrange for emergency transfers, she felt tears threatening for the first time in months, not because she was weak, not because she couldn't handle the challenge, but because her baby was suffering and bureaucracy was standing between her and the help she needed. "Ma'am," the billing coordinator's voice was gentle, "there seems to be some confusion. Your daughter's account shows that her entire treatment has been covered." Amara looked up sharply. "That's impossible. I haven't made any arrangements. According to our records, a gentleman has taken care of the full amount. He's asked to remain anonymous, but he left a message." The coordinator handed her a simple white envelope with her name written in elegant script. With trembling fingers, Amara opened the envelope to find a single sentence written on expensive stationery. "No child should suffer because of money." She stared at the words, her mind reeling. Who could have done this? Who even knew about Aurora's hospitalization? She had only called her mother and sister, and while both women would have helped if they could, neither had the resources for such a generous gift. "The gentleman is actually still here," the coordinator continued. "He's been in the family waiting area since you arrived. Would you like me to show you?" But Amara was already on her feet, clutching the note like a lifeline. She found him in the corner of the waiting area. A tall man with dark hair and kind eyes, still wearing a perfectly tailored business suit. Despite having spent hours in a hospital waiting room, he was reading a financial magazine, but she could tell his attention wasn't really on the pages. When he looked up and saw her approaching, he stood immediately, and Amara was struck by the genuine concern in his expression. "You're Aurora's mother," he said, and his voice was warm, cultured, tinged with an accent she couldn't quite place. "I'm Amara Blake," she replied, holding up the note, "and you're the guardian angel who saved my daughter's life." He smiled, an expression that transformed his entire face from handsome to breathtaking. "Liam Carter," he said, extending his hand, "and I'm no angel, just someone who happened to be in the right place at the right time." His handshake was firm but gentle, and Amara felt a spark of electricity that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the way his eyes seemed to see straight through to her soul. "I don't understand," she said. "How did you even know?" "I was here for a board meeting," Liam explained. "Children's Hospital is one of the charities my company supports. I was walking past the financial office when I heard you on the phone with your bank." He couldn't help but overhear her situation. The simple explanation somehow made his gesture even more extraordinary. He hadn't known her, hadn't had any obligation to help, hadn't even spoken to her before making a decision that would change everything for her and Aurora. "I can't accept this," Amara said, though even as she spoke the words, she knew they weren't true. She couldn't return the gift, couldn't undo what he had done. Aurora was already receiving treatment, already on the path to recovery. "You're not accepting charity," Liam said quietly. "You're accepting help from someone who understands what it's like to worry about someone you love." Something in his tone suggested personal experience with loss, with fear, with the helpless feeling of watching someone precious suffer. "Why?" Amara asked. "Why would you help a complete stranger?" Liam was quiet for a moment, and she saw shadows move across his face, memories of pain that had shaped him into someone who couldn't walk past another person's crisis without offering help. "Because," he said finally, "I know what it's like to feel powerless when someone you love needs help, and I know what it's like to wonder if things might have been different if someone had been there to help when it mattered." Before Amara could ask what he meant, a nurse appeared with an update that sent both of them hurrying back toward the ICU. "Ms. Blake, your daughter is responding beautifully to treatment. Her fever has broken, and her breathing is much improved. You can see her now." The relief that flooded through Amara's body was so intense it almost brought her to her knees. But Liam's steady presence beside her, his hand briefly touching her elbow in support, helped ground her in the moment. Aurora looked so small in the hospital crib, surrounded by monitors and IV lines, but her color was already better, and her breathing was easier. When she saw Amara, she managed a weak smile that made her tears finally spill over. "Hey, baby girl," she whispered, reaching through the crib rails to stroke her soft cheek. "Mama's here. You're going to be just fine." She was dimly aware of Liam standing behind her, giving them space, but not leaving, as if he understood that his presence was somehow important to both of them. When she finally turned around, she found him watching them with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, something between wonder and longing, as if he was seeing something he had never expected to find. "Thank you," she said, and the words carried the weight of everything she couldn't express. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't need to repay me," Liam replied. "But maybe when your daughter is feeling better, you'd let me take you both to dinner. Somewhere with excellent pediatric-friendly lighting and the kind of high chairs that don't topple over." Despite everything, the fear, the exhaustion, the overwhelming gratitude, Amara found herself laughing, a real, genuine laugh that surprised them both. "Are you asking me on a date to a family restaurant with my 5-month-old baby? I'm asking if I can spend more time getting to know the kind of woman who raises a child like that," Liam said, nodding toward Aurora, who had fallen asleep, holding on to one of Amara's fingers through the crib rails. Looking at this man, who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known she was praying, Amara felt something she had convinced herself she would never feel again. She felt the possibility of trust, of connection, of love, that wasn't based on her willingness to diminish herself, to make someone else comfortable. "Okay," she said softly. "When Aurora gets better, we'll have dinner, but I should warn you, she's got very high standards for her dining companions." Liam's smile could have lit up the entire hospital. "I'll do my best to meet them." As if she had heard her name, Aurora stirred in her sleep, one tiny hand reaching toward the sound of their voices, and Amara realized that her daughter's crisis had brought more than just recovery into their lives. It had brought them exactly the person they needed, exactly when they needed him most. Chapter 5. Dancing in the Rain. Sometimes the storm that catches you unprepared becomes the cleansing rain that washes away everything you didn't know you needed to release. 3 weeks after Aurora's recovery, Amara had settled back into the rhythm of her life with a gratitude that colored every moment. Her business was thriving, her daughter was healthy and growing stronger every day, and there was a new lightness in her step that came from knowing she had survived her worst fear and emerged intact. She had thought about Liam Carter every day since the hospital, but he hadn't called, and she hadn't expected him to. Men like him, successful, sophisticated, undoubtedly surrounded by women, without the complications of single motherhood, didn't typically follow through on casual promises made in emotionally charged moments, which was fine. She told herself she didn't need rescuing. She didn't need romance. She had everything she required to build the life she wanted. But on the Tuesday afternoon, when the sky opened up with the kind of sudden downpour that sent everyone scrambling for cover, Amara discovered that sometimes what you need and what you want are the same thing. You just don't realize it until it appears. She had been walking through Riverside Park with Aurora in her stroller, enjoying one of their daily outings that had become essential to both their routines. At 6 months old, Aurora was alert and social, gurgling happily at passing dogs and reaching for leaves with the focused determination that made every simple experience an adventure. The weather had been perfect when they left home, sunny skies with just enough breeze to make the temperature comfortable. But spring storms had their own agenda, and within minutes the blue sky turned ominous, and the first fat raindrops began falling. Amara picked up her pace, trying to reach the park's covered pavilion before the real deluge started. But nature had other plans. The rain went from scattered drops to torrential downpour in seconds, soaking through her light jacket and turning the park paths into rivers. She stopped under a large oak tree, pulling the stroller's weather cover over Aurora while trying to shield herself with nothing more than her purse. The rain was coming down so hard she could barely see 10 feet in any direction. "This is quite a storm." The voice came from directly behind her. "There's always music," Liam replied, pulling out his phone and starting a playlist that began with something slow and romantic. "Sometimes we just have to listen for it." As they swayed together in her living room, surrounded by the cheerful chaos of family celebration, Amara realized that this was what contentment felt like, not the desperate happiness that required constant maintenance and perfect conditions, but the deep satisfaction that came from building something real with someone who saw her completely and chose to stay anyway. "I love you," Liam said quietly, the words spoken directly into her ear so that only she could hear them. The declaration should have terrified her. For months, she had been waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the moment when Liam would realize that single motherhood and blended families were more complicated than he had bargained for. Instead, she felt nothing but peace. "I love you too," she replied, The words flowed as naturally as water finding its level. They continued swaying as the song changed to something more upbeat, and soon Nora was dancing with Aurora, while Clara laughed and took pictures with her phone. The small apartment filled with music and laughter, and the kind of joy that comes from people who have found their tribe. Later, after her family had gone home, and Aurora was finally asleep after an evening of excessive stimulation, Amara and Liam sat on the couch reviewing the day's events. "Your family is wonderful," Liam said, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. "They're yours now, too," Amara replied without thinking, then froze as she realized what she had said. "I mean, if you want them to be, I didn't mean to assume." Liam's hand found her chin, tilting her face up so he could look directly into her eyes. "Amara Blake," he said with the kind of solemnity usually reserved for wedding vows, "I want everything that comes with loving you, your brilliant mind, your fierce independence, your beautiful daughter, your incredible family, your morning coffee ritual, your terrible taste in reality television, and your complete inability to fold fitted sheets properly." "Hey, fitted sheets are impossible," Amara protested, laughing despite the seriousness of the moment. "They are," Liam agreed, leaning down to kiss her forehead, then her nose, then finally her lips. "And I want to spend the rest of my life failing to fold them with you." It wasn't a proposal, not officially, but it was a promise, a declaration of intent that made Amara's heart race with anticipation rather than fear. As they settled into bed that night, Aurora sleeping peacefully in her crib nearby, Amara listened to Liam's steady breathing and felt the certainty of their future settling around them like a warm blanket. She had thought that rebuilding her life after Julian meant learning to be alone, learning to be complete without anyone else's validation or support. Instead, she had discovered something better, learning to be whole, while still leaving room for someone else to be whole beside her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new moments of joy and frustration, and ordinary magic. But tonight, surrounded by the evidence of the family they had created together, Amara Blake fell asleep knowing that she had not just survived her past, she had used it to build something beautiful. Chapter 8. The Proposal. The most profound promises are made not in grand gestures, but in quiet moments when two souls recognize they want to write the rest of their story together. The evening began like so many others had over the past months, Liam arriving at Amara's apartment just as she was finishing her workday, Aurora squealing with delight at the sight of her favorite person, the easy rhythm of a family that had evolved naturally rather than being forced. But there was something different about Liam tonight, an energy that Amara couldn't quite identify. He seemed more focused, more intentional, as if he was carrying the weight of an important secret. "How about we take a walk to the park?" he suggested after dinner, his voice carrying a casualness that felt slightly rehearsed. Aurora could use some fresh air before bedtime. Amara glanced outside, noting the perfect spring evening that made the suggestion reasonable rather than suspicious. "That sounds lovely," she agreed, beginning to gather the supplies that any expedition with a 9-month-old required. The park they had chosen was the same one where they had first been caught in the rain, where they had discovered that conversation flowed between them as naturally as water finding its course. It held special meaning for both of them, the place where friendship had begun its transformation into something deeper. As they walked along the familiar paths, Liam pushing Aurora's stroller with the expertise of someone who had logged countless hours in baby transportation, Amara felt the contentment that had become her default emotional state. This was her life now, not the fantasy she had constructed during her years with Julian, built on performance and the exhausting work of trying to be enough for someone who would never be satisfied. This was real love, complicated and imperfect, and absolutely worth every risk she had taken to allow it into her world. "Let's sit for a while," Liam suggested when they reached the bench that had become their unofficial spot, positioned perfectly to watch the sunset, while Aurora could observe the ducks in the nearby pond. As they settled onto the familiar bench, Aurora babbling happily at the sight of waterfowl, who had learned to recognize her enthusiastic greetings, Amara noticed that Liam's hands were trembling slightly. "Are you okay?" she asked, studying his profile with growing concern. "You seem nervous about something." Liam turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw a vulnerability that took her breath away. This was a man who commanded boardrooms, who had built a business empire, who had survived the worst kind of loss life could inflict. But right now, in this moment, he looked like someone whose entire future hung in the balance of the next few minutes. "Amara," he began, his voice steadier than his hands. "Do you remember what you said the first night I came to your apartment after we got caught in the rain?" The question surprised her. She remembered everything about that evening, the unexpected intimacy of being vulnerable with someone new, the way Liam had shared his grief without asking for pity, the feeling that she was seeing him without any of the masks people typically wore when trying to impress each other. "I said a lot of things that night," she replied carefully. "You said you weren't looking for someone to complete you because you were already whole. You said you wanted someone who was whole, too. Someone who wanted to build something together without either of you having to become smaller to make it work." The memory came flooding back along with the realization of how brave she had been to articulate those needs so clearly, to refuse to apologize for having standards. "I remember," she said quietly. Liam reached over and took her hand, his thumb tracing patterns across her knuckles with the kind of absent affection that spoke to months of growing intimacy. "I've been thinking about those words every day since then," he continued, "about what it means to build something together instead of just filling empty spaces in each other's lives." Aurora chose that moment to demonstrate her latest trick, clapping her hands and saying, "Mama, da," with the kind of perfect timing that made both adults laugh despite the seriousness of the conversation. "Even she knows we're a team," Liam said, reaching out to tickle Aurora's chin. "Don't you, buddy?" "And Liam," Amara said, her heart beginning to race as she recognized the signs of a conversation that was heading toward life-changing territory. "What are you trying to tell me?" Instead of answering with words, Liam stood up from the bench and, to Amara's complete shock, dropped to one knee in front of her. Her breath caught in her throat as he pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket, his hands no longer trembling now that the moment had arrived. "Amara Blake," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the park, drawing the attention of evening joggers and dog walkers who stopped to witness what was obviously an important moment. "You were never broken, despite what anyone tried to tell you. You were never less than worthy of the deepest kind of love. You were just waiting for someone with eyes clear enough to see what was always there." He opened the box to reveal a ring that made Amara's breath catch, not because it was enormous or ostentatious, but because it was absolutely perfect, a classic solitaire setting that showcased a diamond so clear and brilliant, it seemed to capture all the light in the park and send it back in rainbow fractals. "I'm not asking you to marry me because you need someone to take care of you," Liam continued, his words carefully chosen and obviously rehearsed, but no less genuine for their preparation. "I'm asking you to marry me because I want to spend the rest of my life building something extraordinary with the most extraordinary woman I've ever known." Amara felt tears streaming down her face, though she hadn't realized she was crying. This was so different from the proposal she had expected from Julian, so different from the fantasy she had constructed during those years of trying to make herself smaller to fit into his vision. This was a man who saw her exactly as she was, strong, independent, complete, and was asking not to rescue her, but to join forces with her. "I love the way you turned your pain into power," Liam continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "I love the way you built a business empire while raising the most incredible child I've ever known. I love that you taught me that family isn't about biology or tradition. It's about choosing each other every single day." Aurora, apparently sensing the importance of the moment, had gone completely quiet, her attention focused on the adults, as if she understood that her entire future was being decided. "I love that Aurora calls me Dada, even though I didn't earn that title through genetics. I earned it through bedtime stories and midnight feedings, and the privilege of watching her grow up with you." Liam's voice broke slightly, and Amara realized that he was as overwhelmed by the emotion of the moment as she was. "Most of all," he said, pulling himself together with visible effort, "I love that you never once asked me to be anything other than exactly who I am. You didn't try to fix me or change me or fill some void in my life. You just loved me completely, without conditions." The park had grown quiet around them, as if even nature was holding its breath, waiting for her answer. "So," Liam said, holding up the ring so that it caught the last rays of the setting sun, "Amara Blake, will you marry me? Will you let me love you and Aurora for the rest of my life? Will you build something beautiful and complicated and absolutely unprecedented with me?" The answer had been yes from the moment he dropped to one knee, from the moment he had first held Aurora in the hospital, from the moment he had appeared in her life like proof that the universe sometimes did hand out second chances. But instead of speaking immediately, Amara stood up, and cupped Liam's face in her hands, looking directly into his eyes so he could see the absolute certainty there. "Liam Carter," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the park where strangers had stopped their evening activities to witness their moment. Yes, to all of it, yes. The cheer that went up from their impromptu audience was spontaneous and joyful, but Amara barely heard it. She was too focused on the way Liam's face transformed as he slipped the ring onto her finger, the way it fit perfectly, as if it had been made specifically for her hand. When he kissed her, it tasted like promise and possibility, and the kind of love that doesn't diminish over time, but grows deeper and more complex with each passing day. Aurora, not to be left out of the celebration, chose that moment to clap her hands and shout, "Da, Mama!" with such enthusiasm that both adults burst into laughter. "I think that's a yes from her too," Liam said, scooping Aurora out of her stroller and lifting her high enough to make her giggle. As they walked home through the park, now officially engaged, Amara felt the final pieces of her transformation clicking into place. She had gone from broken to whole, from victim to victor, from someone who apologized for taking up space to someone who claimed her rightful place in the world. But more than that, she had learned that the best kind of love doesn't ask you to choose between independence and partnership. It simply recognizes that some people are meant to build empires together. The ring on her finger caught the streetlight as they made their way home, and Amara Blake, soon to be Amara Carter, realized that her revenge against Julian Voss was complete, not because she had set out to hurt him, but because she had discovered something he would never understand: that real love sees beauty where others see flaws, creates strength where others see weakness, and builds something magnificent from whatever materials life provides. Tomorrow would bring wedding planning, family celebrations, and all the joyful chaos that comes with combining two lives into one shared future. But tonight, she was simply a woman who had been seen, chosen, and loved exactly as she was, and that was the greatest victory of all. Chapter 9. The Calm Before the Storm. Success tastes sweetest when you've earned every drop through your own sweat, tears, and unshakable refusal to accept anything less than you deserve. The wedding preparations had transformed Amara's life into a whirlwind of decisions, appointments, and the kind of joyful chaos that comes with planning the celebration of a lifetime. But beneath the excitement of choosing flowers and tasting cakes, she was acutely aware that her upcoming nuptials represented more than just the union of two people in love. They represented the complete transformation of a woman who had once been dismissed as unworthy. 2 months had passed since Liam's proposal, and in that time, Amara's consulting business had reached heights she had never imagined possible. Her client roster now included Fortune 500 companies. Her speaking engagements commanded 5-figure fees, and industry publications regularly featured her insights on innovation and leadership. The success was intoxicating not because of the money or recognition, but because it proved definitively that Julian Voss's assessment of her value had been not just wrong, but spectacularly, laughably incorrect. "I can't believe this is really happening," Nora said, zipping up the garment bag that contained Amara's wedding dress, a creation of silk and lace, so exquisite it belonged in a museum. They were in the bridal suite of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, the most prestigious venue in the city, where tomorrow's ceremony would bring together over 300 guests representing the pinnacle of business, society, and political influence. "Believe it," Clara Blake said with fierce maternal pride, adjusting the pearl necklace that had belonged to her own mother. "My daughter is marrying one of the most powerful men in the city, and she's doing it as his equal, not as someone grateful for his attention." Aurora, now 11 months old and walking with the confident swagger of someone who had conquered mobility, toddled around the suite in her tiny dress, charming the hotel staff who had been assigned to ensure every detail of the wedding was perfect. "Papa," she announced proudly when Liam appeared in the doorway, and the joy on Liam's face at the declaration made Amara's heart swell with happiness. Liam had legally adopted Aurora the month before, a process that had required Julian to sign away his parental rights, something he had done without hesitation, when presented with the opportunity to escape any future financial obligations. "How are my favorite people?" Liam asked, scooping Aurora into his arms while leaning down to kiss Amara's forehead. "Nervous?" Amara admitted, though the butterflies in her stomach were the good kind. "Anticipation rather than anxiety." "Don't be," Liam said with absolute confidence. Tomorrow is just the public celebration of what's already true. We're already a family. We're already partners. Tomorrow, we're just making it official. But even as she drew comfort from Liam's steady presence, Amara was aware of an undercurrent of tension that had been building over the past few weeks. Word of her engagement to Liam Carter had spread through the city's social circles like wildfire, bringing with it a level of attention she hadn't entirely expected. People who had ignored her during her years with Julian suddenly wanted to renew old friendships. Business competitors who had dismissed her as a lightweight now sought her advice, and most significantly, there had been whispers that Julian himself had returned to the city after 2 years abroad. "Has anyone heard anything more about Julian being back?" Nora asked, as if reading Amara's thoughts. Clara's expression hardened. "I don't care if he's back or not. He made his choice when he walked away. He doesn't get to have an opinion about what happens now." But Amara knew it wasn't that simple. Julian's presence in the city, even if he kept his distance, represented a potential complication to the perfect new life she had built. Not because she still had feelings for him, that chapter of her life was completely closed, but because she knew him well enough to predict that seeing her success would trigger his ego in ways that might not remain private. The evening's final wedding preparation meeting was held in Liam's penthouse, where the wedding planner presented the timeline for the next day's events. With the precision of a military campaign, the ceremony begins at 4. The planner explained, reviewing details they had discussed dozens of times. The reception immediately follows in the ballroom, dinner will be served at 7, and dancing will continue until midnight. "Security arrangements?" Liam asked, though they had covered this topic extensively as well. "Complete. The guest list has been verified, the venue has been secured, and we have contingencies in place for any unexpected situations." After the planner left, Amara and Liam sat on his terrace overlooking the city. Aurora finally asleep in her travel crib after an evening of excessive excitement. "Are you really not nervous?" Amara asked, settling into Liam's arms as they watched the lights twinkle below them. "About marrying you?" "Not for a second," Liam replied without hesitation. "About anything else that might happen tomorrow?" "Also not worried. Whatever comes up, we'll handle it together." His confidence was reassuring, but Amara couldn't shake the feeling that their perfect happiness was about to be tested in ways they hadn't prepared for. Her instincts proved correct when her phone rang at 11:30 that night, just as she was getting ready for bed in her own apartment. She had insisted on spending the night before her wedding in her own space, surrounded by the evidence of the independent life she had built. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something compelled her to answer. "Amara, it's Julian." The sound of his voice after 2 years hit her like a physical blow, not because it stirred any romantic feelings, but because it represented everything she had fought to overcome. "What do you want, Julian?" she asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline now coursing through her system. "I'm in town for business, and I heard about your engagement. I wanted to congratulate you." The lie was so transparent, it was almost insulting. Julian had never congratulated anyone without expecting something in return. "Thank you," she said simply, offering nothing more. "I was wondering if we could meet for coffee. There are some things I'd like to say, some apologies I owe you." Amara almost laughed at the audacity. After 2 years of silence, after signing away his rights to Aurora without a single inquiry about his daughter's well-being, Julian wanted to clear his conscience the night before her wedding to another man. "I don't think that's a good idea," she said firmly. "Please, Amara, just an hour. I know I hurt you, and I want to make things right before you start your new life." There was something in his tone, a desperation that sounded like panic, that made her pause. This wasn't the arrogant man who had humiliated her in public. This sounded like someone who had realized too late what he had thrown away. "Julian, I'm getting married tomorrow to a wonderful man. I have a beautiful daughter and a successful business. I've moved on completely, and I suggest you do the same." "I know about the baby," he said quietly, and Amara's blood ran cold. "What did you say?" "Aurora, I know she's my daughter. I've known for months." The admission hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that made Amara's mind race. If Julian had known about Aurora for months, why was he calling now? What did he want? "That's not your concern anymore," she said, fighting to keep her voice level. "You signed away your parental rights. Legally, Liam is Aurora's father now. I know what I signed, but I also know that tomorrow, when you marry Liam Carter, you'll become one of the most prominent couples in the city, Do you really want to start your marriage with lies about your daughter's paternity? The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Julian was suggesting that he might cause problems if his demands, whatever they were, weren't met. What exactly are you asking for, Julian? Just a conversation. 1 hour tomorrow morning before your wedding. Give me a chance to explain, to apologize properly, and then I'll disappear from your life forever. Amara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of a decision that could impact not just her wedding day, but her entire future. She could refuse, could hang up, and hope that Julian would respect her boundaries, or she could meet with him, hear whatever he had to say, and deal with any consequences on her own terms. Where? She asked finally. The Riverside Cafe, 10 tomorrow morning. After she hung up, Amara sat in her quiet apartment, Aurora sleeping peacefully in her crib, and tried to process what had just happened. Tomorrow was supposed to be the culmination of her fairy tale transformation, the moment when her happiness became complete and public. Instead, it was starting to feel like the setup for one final test of everything she had built. She considered calling Liam, telling him about Julian's contact, and letting him handle the situation. But something stopped her, the realization that this was her past to confront, her demons to face, her opportunity to close this chapter of her life on her own terms. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Amara Blake prepared herself for what might be the most important conversation of her life. Tomorrow would bring her wedding, her happiness, her future with Liam and Aurora. But first, she would have to face the ghost of everything she had overcome. Chapter 10. The Final Slap. Today, a woman writes the final page of her transformation, from victim to victor, from broken to unbreakable. Dawn broke over the city like a promise being kept, painting the sky in shades of gold that seemed crafted specifically for this day. Amara stood at her apartment window, still wrapped in silk pajamas, watching the world wake up to witness what would become the most important day of her life. The woman gazing back at her from the window's reflection bore no resemblance to the insecure girlfriend who had once sought validation from a man incapable of seeing her worth. This woman stood with unshakable confidence, her transformation complete and profound. "Mama," Aurora's voice carried from her crib, accompanied by her morning ritual of shaking her favorite rattle with pure enthusiasm. At 11 months old, Aurora was walking confidently, babbling in complex patterns, and charming everyone with a personality that radiated joy. "Good morning, my beautiful girl," Amara said, lifting her from the crib and spinning her until her giggles filled the apartment. "Are you ready for the most important day of our lives?" The morning unfolded with clockwork precision. Clara arrived first, transforming the kitchen into mission control with coffee, pastries, and organized energy. "I still can't believe this is really happening," Clara said. "My daughter marrying Liam Carter." Nora appeared next, carefully carrying the wedding dress, an architectural perfection in silk and lace. "When you walk down that aisle today," Nora declared, "every person in that church is going to see what you've always been: absolutely extraordinary." The hair and makeup team arrived like a skilled unit, transforming the apartment into a luxury salon, but Amara understood now that true beauty radiated from confidence, from purpose, from the unshakable knowledge of your own worth. The styling was simply the frame for a picture that had always been magnificent. At 10 sharp, Amara stood before her full-length mirror. The dress flowed like liquid starlight, her hair styled in an elegant chignon, makeup enhancing her natural radiance. "You look absolutely breathtaking," Clara said, tears threatening her makeup. "Julian is going to see exactly what he threw away," Nora added with fierce satisfaction. The Riverside Cafe was nearly deserted when Amara arrived, her heels announcing confidence with every step. Julian walked through the door, looking diminished, his suit hanging loose, hair showing premature gray, eyes holding the haunted quality of a man who had realized too late that arrogance had cost him everything. "Amara," he said quietly, "thank you for agreeing to see me. You look incredible." She studied him with detached assessment. "You have 20 minutes. Say whatever you came to say." Julian ran shaking hands through his thinning hair. "I've been in London for 2 years, trying to rebuild my career after everything collapsed here. I know about Aurora," he continued, his voice barely audible. "I know she's my daughter, and I know I have absolutely no right to any relationship with her." "That's correct," Amara replied with clinical precision. "I destroyed something irreplaceable when I let my insecurities convince me that you weren't worthy of me, when the truth was that I was never worthy of you." "What exactly do you want, Julian?" she asked, checking her watch. "I want to apologize. Not the shallow kind, but the real kind that acknowledges the damage I caused." "Apology noted," she said. "Anything else?" Julian leaned forward desperately. "I've watched your success from a distance. I know I have no right. But I was hoping that maybe, for Aurora's sake." "For Aurora's sake." Amara's voice carried a sharp edge. "You signed away your parental rights without inquiry about her well-being. You've made the deliberate choice not to contact me, not to ask about your daughter." She stood, gathering her purse. "I have a wedding to attend. My actual family is waiting." "Amara, please," Julian said, reaching for her arm. She stepped back smoothly. "Let me be completely clear. You are nothing to me. You are nothing to my daughter. You are nothing to my future. You called me ugly once," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "You tried to convince the world that I wasn't worthy of love or respect, but you were wrong about everything. The ugliness was never in me. It was in your inability to recognize beauty when it was standing directly in front of you." The wedding ceremony at St. Matthew's Cathedral exceeded every fairy tale. Gothic architecture provided timeless elegance, while cascading white roses and orchids created ethereal beauty. 200 guests filled the sacred space, close family, genuine friends, respected colleagues who had come to celebrate the triumph of a woman who had transformed pain into power. The processional began with Nora, radiant in sapphire blue. Then came Aurora, in her miniature dress, scattering rose petals with focused determination, but it was Amara's entrance that rendered the congregation motionless. She moved down the aisle with measured pace, her hand resting on Clara's arm, her face luminous with absolute joy. Liam stood at the altar, his eyes never leaving her face, his expression of wonder and love so profound that even hardened executives felt their eyes moisten. When she reached him, he took her hands and whispered something that made her smile. With such radiance, the photographer's camera seemed inadequate. The ceremony was perfection, traditional enough to honor families, personal enough to reflect their unique love story. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss was gentle, meaningful, witnessed by everyone who mattered. The reception in the Grand Metropolitan's ballroom was legendary. Amara and Liam moved through the crowd like the power couple they had become, accepting congratulations from their carefully selected community. But during the toasts, a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. Security was engaged in heated discussion with someone demanding entry. "Let him in," Amara said clearly, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet ballroom. Julian entered, looking like a man who had lost everything worth having. His presence created a ripple of whispered recognition among guests who remembered the scandal. He approached the head table, his face showing the strain of whatever desperate plan had driven him to crash their wedding. The ballroom fell completely silent, 200 people watching this unexpected drama unfold. "Amara," he said, his voice cracking, "I know I have no right to be here, but I couldn't let this day pass without telling you how sorry." He never completed the sentence. Amara rose with elegant composure, walked around the table to where Julian stood, and delivered a slap that resonated throughout the ballroom like a thunderclap. "No woman in this world is ugly," she declared, her voice reaching every corner. "The fault was in your eyes. You never learned to see the beauty of the heart." The ballroom erupted in applause that built to a thunderous ovation. 200 guests rose as one, acknowledging the complete triumph of a woman who had alchemized humiliation into strength. Julian stood frozen, his hand pressed against his cheek, finally comprehending what his blindness had cost him. Amara turned away and walked back to her husband, her daughter, her family, and her future, leaving Julian to confront his consequences alone. The woman who had once been called ugly had become the most celebrated bride in recent memory, married to a man who saw her true worth, raising a child who would never question her value, surrounded by people who recognized her strength. The slap that echoed through the ballroom was more than the conclusion to an old relationship. It was the final declaration of a woman who had learned the most important truth: her worth had never been up for debate.